Did you know that a seemingly happy childhood could still hold the key to your adult anxieties and struggles? New research reveals the lasting impact of early childhood trauma, even emotional neglect, on our adult lives. Are you tired of feeling stuck in unhealthy patterns? What if the answer to your struggles lies not in your present, but in your past? Explore the hidden wounds of childhood trauma and discover the path to healing. For years, I blamed myself for my insecurities. Then I learned about the impact of my childhood. Let others share their stories of how early trauma shaped their lives, and discover how you can break free from its hold. Ever feel like you're constantly on edge, even when things are good? Maybe you struggle with intimacy or self-doubt. It turns out these issues might have roots buried deep in your childhood. Let's get deeper. Dr. Gabor Maté will discuss all your questions and navigate the roots of your trauma.
And those things that happen to you, I think you say at some point that all trauma is pre-verbal. And trauma is something that you're quite careful in the book to say, look, it doesn't mean that you were run over or you were kidnapped. Yeah. That it's things like not being fed as a small child.
Not being responded to, yeah.
Yes. And you then take that idea of trauma being something that can happen to a very young child, and you say, before our minds can make the world, that we make the world that we then live in. He says, but before that happens, the world makes our minds.
Yeah.
And it's those early experiences, for you, are those the things then that you could classify as traumas, that they become embedded in the child and manifest them later in life as something?
That's right.
How does that happen?
How does it get embedded?
Yeah, well, first of all, what sort of things are they? And then why do they get embedded?
So trauma basically means a wound. So trauma is when you're wounded and that wound persists and has impact in your life later on. So trauma, this is important to distinguish. Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. So I just came back from Budapest. I was there presenting this book in Hungarian, and this is, I don't know who designs this, but I went, one of the things that I have to do every day is swim. You don't want to talk to me if I haven't swum, And I swam this morning already, it's okay. So in Budapest, I was staying at a hotel, and around the corner there's a swim club where I go swimming every morning. Across the street, directly across the street, as far from us as, say, the second row here, is the building where my mother and I lived when I was 11 months old, and I nearly died there. And she gave me to a stranger in the street on those same paving stones that are still there. And so I didn't see her for 5 or 6 weeks. A lot of people know this story. The trauma wasn't that she gave me to a stranger. The trauma is what I made it mean. Now, any child, what can a child make it mean except that I'm being abandoned? And who gets abandoned? Somebody who's not lovable, somebody who's not wanted. So the trauma then is my sense of not being wanted, not being lovable, not being considered important enough. And now that trauma plays itself out for decades afterwards. So it's not what happened to me as such. Because when you look at it objectively, what happened to me as such was that my mother gave me to a stranger and the stranger took me. Those are both huge acts of love, actually. That's the universe loving this child to take care of it.
You're absolutely right. Childhood trauma can have a profound impact on a person's sense of worth and lovability. And it goes deeper than just the event itself. Here's a breakdown of why. 1. Interpretation shapes the impact. Events are neutral. A child might experience a situation like a parent being busy or unavailable. This event itself isn't inherently traumatic. The child's interpretation creates the trauma. However, if the child interprets this as, I'm not important enough for my parents' love and attention, it can be a traumatic experience. This interpretation shapes the emotional impact. 2. Emotional memory gets embedded. Nervous system remembers. When the child experiences this emotional response, feeling unloved, abandoned, their nervous system becomes hyper-aware of similar situations. This creates a strong emotional memory, triggers in adulthood. As an adult, encountering situations that even slightly resemble the original trauma, for example, a partner being distant, can trigger the emotional memory. This can lead to feelings of worthlessness and difficulty feeling loved, consequences for sense of worth and lovability, self-blame and negative self-talk. The child's interpretation might lead to self-blame. It's my fault they don't love me. This negative self-talk can persist into adulthood, impacting self-worth, fear of rejection. The emotional memory of abandonment can make the person hypersensitive to rejection in adult relationships. This can lead to difficulty forming healthy attachments and a constant fear of being unlovable. Overall, childhood trauma can create a distorted view of self-worth and lovability. It's not the event itself, but the child's interpretation and the emotional memory etched in the nervous system that leads to these long-lasting effects.
But that doesn't matter. It's what I make it mean. So the wound is then what happens within us. That gets embedded in the nervous system as emotional memory, not as recollection. I don't recall being given to a stranger by my mother because the parts of the brain that recall aren't even online at that age yet. It doesn't come online until years later. But the emotional memory of being hurt and being abandoned and not being wanted, that's embedded in the nervous system. And then it gets triggered whenever anything even vaguely resembling it later on, decades later, shows up. In fact, if you look at the expression being triggered, it's a really interesting expression. These days we're, trigger warning, don't you triggered me. Well, here's the thing. What can be triggered? For a trigger to do anything, a trigger is a very small little thing. For a trigger to have any impact whatsoever, there has to be an ammunition there has to be explosive charge. So when I get triggered, it's not because somebody did something. It's because what they did happened to set off the explosive charge, the emotional baggage that I'm carrying. So if I carry the emotional baggage of somebody who doesn't have a sense of being wanted and being important, anything later on that reminds me of that will trigger me and drive my behavior. So that's how trauma works. It's embedded in the nervous system, in the brain, in the form of emotional subverbal memory.
Nothing you...
By the way, I'm sorry to say one more thing. It's also embedded in the body. So many of you will have had the experience, or if you're a body worker, like a massage therapist and so on, you go to a massage therapist, they touch you in a certain part of the body, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed by emotion. You've had that experience? So that's the body, as Bessel says, Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. So the trauma is embedded also in the muscles and in the connective tissues and the nerves.
You also in the book you make the point that this word trauma, it's difficult to hear it in any way other than negative, but the point that you make in the book is that the story you tell yourself or that your body takes in is meant to help you at the time.
At the time,
that it's and is that why it gets retained? That in its original form, it's doing something positive, but later becomes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Tell us more about that, please.
Absolutely. So let's take somebody with a diagnosis of personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, one of these diagnoses that don't explain anything. They might describe something, but they don't explain anything, So one of the characteristics is that they don't trust people. It's just hard for them to form relationships. And they very easily feel hurt in a relationship.
Emotional baggage and embedded emotional memory. Emotional baggage refers to the unresolved emotional issues and traumas from past experiences that we carry with us. These experiences create emotional memories that become embedded in our minds. When we encounter situations that resemble these past events, our brain triggers these stored memories, leading to behavioral responses that are often automatic and unconscious. For instance, a person who experienced betrayal in a previous relationship might react with mistrust or anxiety in a new relationship, even if there is no immediate reason to feel that way. This response is driven by the embedded emotional memory, which acts as a reference point for the brain. The body's role in storing emotional trauma beyond the mind, the body also plays a crucial role in storing emotional trauma. This concept, often referred to as somatic memory, suggests that the body can hold on to the physical sensations and emotional pain associated with traumatic events. When a person experiences physical touch or other sensory inputs that remind them of their past trauma, it can trigger an overwhelming emotional response. For example, a gentle touch on the shoulder might cause someone who has experienced physical abuse to feel sudden, intense fear or sadness. This reaction occurs because the body has stored the trauma, and the touch serves as a trigger, releasing the pent-up emotions associated with the past experience. How emotional baggage manifests in behavior reactivity to triggers. Emotional baggage can cause individuals to react disproportionately to minor stimuli. A small disagreement might lead to an intense argument, or a slight inconvenience could result in significant stress. These reactions stem from past unresolved issues rather than the present situation. Avoidance and withdrawal. People with significant emotional baggage might avoid certain situations or withdraw from relationships to protect themselves from potential pain. This can lead to social isolation and missed opportunities for personal growth and connection. Patterns in relationships. Emotional baggage often manifests in patterns within relationships. For example, someone who experienced neglect as a child might either seek constant reassurance in adult relationships or become overly independent, avoiding closeness to prevent the risk of abandonment. Addressing emotional baggage. To mitigate the impact of emotional baggage on behavior, it's essential to engage in self-awareness and healing practices. Therapy. Professional therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or somatic experiencing, can help individuals process and resolve past traumas. Therapists guide clients in identifying triggers and developing healthier coping mechanisms. Mindfulness and meditation. These practices can increase self-awareness and help individuals stay present, reducing the automatic responses triggered by past emotional memories. Physical activities. Engaging in activities like yoga or Tai Chi can help release stored emotional trauma from the body. These practices promote a connection between mind and body, facilitating emotional healing. Healthy relationships. Building supportive and understanding relationships can provide a safe space for individuals to explore and address their emotional baggage. Open communication and empathy from loved ones are crucial in this process. Understanding the intricate connection between emotional baggage, behavior, and somatic memory highlights the importance of addressing unresolved emotional issues for overall well-being. By recognizing and working through these embedded memories, individuals can break free from the patterns of the past and develop healthier, more adaptive responses to current life situations.
Well, that's a perfectly normal defensive response to a childhood when you were hurt a lot. You shouldn't trust. I mean, why would you want to trust? How could you trust if you were always having a sense of being disappointed and even being betrayed? So that what's called to be a pathological manifestation actually begins as a coping mechanism, and it's associated with your survival. Or depression, you know, this disease of depression. Well, really? What does it mean to depress something? It means to push it down. Now what gets pushed on in depression is emotions. But why would somebody push down their emotions? Only because it was dangerous for them to express it, or unacceptable for them to express it. In other words, they listen to a lot of parenting experts who tell people to suppress children's emotions if the emotions aren't acceptable to the parents. Then a child, in order to survive, will suppress their emotions, will depress them. That's a survival technique associated with being accepted and being part of the family, which is something the child cannot do without.
Yeah.
So once you associate something with survival, you're going to keep doing it, especially since it's unconscious. It's not like you chose to do it, it's just that, this is how your organism survived, by depressing your emotions. Now you're going to keep doing that. In fact, you'll be afraid not to. And later on, you're diagnosed with this disease. But it begins as a coping mechanism. And there's so many others of these coping mechanisms that are associated with survival, and therefore we don't give them up, because if our survival depends on being a certain way, if that's what we learned, we're not going to give it up that easily.
Especially, as you point out, children have very few options.
Yeah.
The ones that are built into us as mammals, it's fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a baby, you can't fight.
Yeah,
And it's very difficult to run away, so it doesn't leave you with much, does it? Except, as you say, just to freeze and...
Yeah.
And it's that need for attachment. This is a word that you deal with a lot. Tell us about attachment.
So this is a conflict that is probably central to my work in all manner of conditions and in all kinds of situations. It's a very powerful dynamic in adult relationships, for example, is the child has an absolute need to belong to the parents and to be cared for by the parents. That drive to be close to somebody in order to be taken care of, or to take care of the other for that matter, is called attachment. And mammals are creatures of attachment. They can't survive without attachment, without the caring relationship. Obviously, the young cannot survive. So attachment, that's fine. But then we have this other need that's that's also determined by evolution, which is, I call authenticity, and just auto, the selves, authenticity, being in touch with ourselves, being in touch with our feelings and our bodies and our emotions.
Why suppress? The threat response. Imagine a child living in a chaotic or abusive household. When they express emotions like anger or sadness, it might be met with further punishment or neglect. This creates a threat response in the child's nervous system. Expressing emotions becomes unsafe. Flight, fight, or freeze. The child's body goes into survival mode, activating the well-known fight, flight, or freeze response. Suppressing emotions becomes a way to freeze and avoid further harm. Dissociation. In some cases, children may even dissociate, detach from their emotions and surroundings, as a way to mentally escape the painful situation. Emotional suppression, a double-edged sword. Short-term benefit, long-term cost. In the short term, suppressing emotions helps a child survive a difficult situation. However, in the long term, it can become a default coping mechanism, leading to problems in adulthood. How suppression becomes habitual neural pathways. When a behavior is repeated, suppressing emotions, the brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior. Over time, suppression becomes an automatic response. Lack of emotional vocabulary. Children who suppress emotions may not have the opportunity to learn how to identify and express them healthily. This can lead to difficulty managing emotions later in life. The difficulty of unlearning suppression. Survival instinct. The brain still perceives suppressing emotions as a survival technique, even if the original threat is gone. This makes it difficult to unlearn this behavior. Fear of vulnerability. People who suppressed emotions as children might associate expressing emotions with vulnerability and weakness. This fear can keep them from expressing themselves openly. Breaking the cycle therapy. Working with a therapist can help individuals who suppressed emotions as children learn healthier coping mechanisms and emotional regulation skills. Mindfulness practices. Techniques like mindfulness meditation can help individuals become more aware of their emotions and learn to accept them without judgment. Overall, suppressing emotions as a child is a natural response to a difficult environment. However, it can have long-lasting consequences for emotional well-being in adulthood. By understanding the reasons behind suppression and working to break free from it, individuals can learn to express their emotions in a healthy way.
I know last time I spoke here, I think I asked the same question, but let me do it again. I think I did. If you've had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something and ignoring it and then being sorry afterwards, just raise your hand, okay? Well, see, the vast majority. What you're telling me here is about your childhood. Because gut feelings are essential for survival. We evolved out there in nature. For millions of years, the humanoid ancestors of our species lived out there in nature, as did our own species live out in nature for most of our existence as a species. Like out of the 150, 200,000 years that Homo sapiens has walked the earth, if that can be represented in 1 hour, then until about 5 minutes ago we lived out there in nature. How long does any creature in nature survive if they're not in touch with their gut feelings? So that being in touch with our bodies and our emotions is essential also. Terrific. But what happens is, if for the sake of fitting with the family or with the culture that doesn't particularly support our authenticity, we have to give up our connection to ourselves, our authenticity, for the sake of attachment. Then being inauthentic, being out of touch with ourselves, is how we survive. We're afraid to be ourselves because we associate being ourselves with a threat of being rejected. And so this means that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be in relationships where we're afraid to be ourselves, to really say what it feels like for us. Now that has terrific implications. When I say terrific, I mean significant implications. A study I quote in the book, they followed 2,000 women over 10 years. Over a 10-year period, those women who were unhappily married and didn't express their feelings were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were unhappily married, but they did talk about their feelings. So that inauthenticity, which is not a moral judgment on my part, it's something people do in order to survive their childhoods. But that exacts a major cost in terms of physical and mental health. Not to mention your relationships, where you're afraid to be yourself, where you're in a relationship and your partner doesn't even know you because you're afraid to be yourself. So you feel alone even when you're partnered, because if you're not known, you're going to feel alone. Doesn't matter how many people surround you. So the price that we pay for inauthenticity is huge, and yet so many of us survived our childhood. And when you put your hand up, I mean, have you ever met a 1-day-old baby that wasn't in touch with their gut feelings?
The story of Lily, a journey of early emotional experiences. Children are like sponges, soaking up the world around them. They learn and develop primarily through their early emotional experiences. These experiences shape their understanding of themselves, others, and the world. Let's explore this concept through the story of Lily, a young girl whose early emotional experiences profoundly influenced her development. The beginning, Lily's world. Lily was born into a loving family. From the moment she entered the world, she was surrounded by warmth and care. Her parents, Sarah and Mark, were attentive and nurturing. They understood the importance of emotional connection and made sure to provide a safe and supportive environment for Lily. The power of love and security. In her first years, Lily experienced the power of love and security. Sarah and Mark were always there to respond to her cries, soothe her fears, and celebrate her joys. When Lily was a baby, she often woke up crying at night. Sarah would gently pick her up, hold her close, and rock her back to sleep. This consistent response taught Lily that the world was a safe place and that her needs would be met. She learned to trust her parents and felt secure in their presence. As Lily grew into a toddler, she began to explore her surroundings. She would toddle around the living room, picking up toys and examining everything with wide-eyed curiosity. Whenever she stumbled and fell, Mark was there to encourage her to get back up, offering a reassuring smile. These small moments of support and encouragement built Lily's confidence and sense of security. The impact of emotional validation. Lily's parents also understood the importance of emotional validation. They knew that acknowledging and validating her feelings was crucial for her emotional development. When Lily threw a tantrum because she couldn't have a second cookie, instead of dismissing her feelings, Sarah would kneel down to her level and say, "I see you're upset because you want another cookie. It's okay to feel sad, but we can't have more cookies right now." This simple act of validation helped Lily understand that her emotions were normal and acceptable. She learned to identify and express her feelings instead of suppressing them. This skill became a cornerstone of her emotional intelligence, allowing her to navigate her emotions healthily as she grew older. The role of play in emotional learning. Playtime was another critical aspect of Lily's early emotional experiences. Sarah and Mark made sure to spend quality time playing with Lily. They would build towers with blocks, have tea parties with stuffed animals, and create imaginative stories together. During these play sessions, Lily learned about empathy, cooperation, and problem solving. When her tower of blocks fell, Sarah would say, "Oh no, it fell. Let's try again together." This taught Lily the importance of perseverance and teamwork. Through imaginative play, Lily explored different roles and scenarios, which helped her understand various emotions and perspectives. The influence of positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement played a significant role in shaping Lily's behavior and self-esteem. Whenever she accomplished something, no matter how small, her parents would celebrate her efforts. When she learned to tie her shoelaces, Mark clapped and said, "Great job, Lily. You did it all by yourself." These moments of praise and encouragement boosted Lily's self-confidence. She developed a sense of competence and a belief in her abilities. This positive reinforcement motivated her to take on new challenges and approach life with a growth mindset. The long-term impact of early emotional experiences. As Lily grew older, the foundation of love, security, validation, and positive reinforcement continued to influence her development. In school, she was confident, empathetic, and emotionally intelligent. She made friends easily and navigated social situations with ease. When faced with challenges, she approached them with resilience and determination, knowing that she was capable and supported. Lily's early emotional experiences had a profound impact on her overall well-being. She developed a strong sense of self-worth and emotional stability. These qualities allowed her to form healthy relationships, excel academically, and pursue her passions with confidence. Lily's story illustrates how children learn and develop primarily through early emotional experiences. The love, security, validation, and positive reinforcement provided by her parents created a strong foundation for her emotional and psychological growth. These early experiences shaped her understanding of herself and the world, influencing her development in profound ways.
Oh, I'm tired and I'm hungry and I'm uncomfortable and I'm wet, but Mom and Dad are working so hard, I better not cry. I better not cry. Come on, In other words, when you put your hand up, something happened between the day you were born and a few years later when you no longer listened to your gut feelings because you couldn't afford to. Something happened.
In a way, one of the things which come across very strongly, especially in the early part of the book, is that we tend to think that children learn things when we teach them, when they get to school, or when we can have a conversation with them. And very strongly in the book, what comes across is that children become who they are and learn their first moral language, as it were, before any of that. In other words, if you think to yourself, I shall wait until the child can speak and then I'll teach them, it's too late. They've already learned everything from what you did or didn't do.
Yeah, that's right. So that and as a parent, because I was quite out of touch with myself and based on my own history, I was never comfortable playing with kids. I kept thinking, well, once they learn language, because I'm good at words, you see. So I thought, once they learn language, then I'll be able to. But I missed the whole point, is that the real development happens before words even come along. The emotional part of the brain, the holistic, you might say more feminine, although it's not gender determined at all, holistic emotional part of the brain, the right side of the brain, both in terms of the evolution of the species, but also in terms of the development of the individual. The right side of the brain, the emotional brain, develops first. and it's the template for everything. If we get the right side of the brain right, the left brain will follow very nicely. If we don't get the right side of the brain, if we don't establish the emotional relationships which children require for healthy development, then they might become very intellectually developed on the left brain side, but they'll be very underdeveloped. There won't be a proper template for it. And then they're going to be professors and all that kind of stuff, you know. Or philosophers, I don't know. Or medical doctors for that matter. So that in this culture, the left brain really rules. But the left brain, divorced from a healthy emotional underpinning, where does it get us? It gets us to where we are, which is, we're the only species that creates environments that are destructive to its own species. That's where the left brain has got us, because the right brain is underdeveloped.
And it can't speak. I mean, you can't, in some way you don't have verbal access to the lessons, that first language you learned by the time you were 6 months old. So how does that part of us speak to us when we won't listen?
It speaks to us through our... See, here's the thing. Here's the other thing. We think that we have this one brain up here. And what's a brain? A brain interprets stimuli from the environment, processes them, and responds. That's what a brain does. So yeah, we have the cerebrum up here. But there's also, it turns out, there's a brain connected to the heart. There's a nervous system that surrounds the heart, which is in communication with this brain here. And of course the gut has been called the second brain. The gut has more neurochemicals than the brain does in some ways. And gut feelings are not luxuries, as we've demonstrated. They're actually a form of knowledge. So the gut is processing stimuli from the environment. When these three brains are in sync with each other, then you have true wisdom. Then you have true awareness. When this one is unmoored from the other two, you can have all kinds of logic and all kinds of science and all kinds of technology, but you're not going to have wisdom.
As we navigate through life, we must remember that true wisdom and awareness come from more than just intellectual understanding. Our culture often values left brain dominance, focusing on logic and analysis, but this can lead to disconnection from our emotional and intuitive selves. This imbalance can result in destructive behaviors, not just towards others, but towards our own well-being. Imagine a world where we align the brain in our head, heart, and gut. This alignment fosters true wisdom and deep awareness, guiding us to live more balanced, compassionate, and fulfilling lives. Let's strive to reconnect with our emotional and intuitive sides, nurturing a more holistic approach to our existence. By doing so, we can create environments that are not only intellectually stimulating, but also emotionally enriching and sustainably harmonious. Remember, the journey to true wisdom starts with embracing and integrating all parts of ourselves. Let's move forward together, fostering a culture that values balance, connection, and holistic growth. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to Inside Serene, your mental fitness channel. May your path be filled with insight, harmony, and profound awareness.